Welcome back. You're watching NewsX with me, Meenakshi Upreti, and focusing back on the G20 summit. The UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak met with his Indian counterpart Narendra Modi at the sidelines of the G20 summit in Bali, Indonesia today, amidst cancellations of his bilateral meetings with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Rishi Sunak in Bali said that there is excitement about India taking over the G20 presidency. On the India-UK trade deal, Sunak said, and I quote, "We remain committed to trade deal with India, but we need to get these things right." Earlier, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak gave a go-ahead to a scheme that offers 3,000 visas for young professionals from India to work in the UK each year after a key meeting with Prime Minister Narendra Modi during the first day of the G20 summit. The scheme will provide 18 to 30-year-old degree-educated Indian nationals a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to take part in a professional and cultural exchange program. The reciprocal route will open in early 2023. What does Rishi Sunak and the Indian Prime Minister, of course, Narendra Modi's meet mean for the Indo-UK relations, for the FTA deal, the significance really of India taking over the presidency of G20, the larger ramifications of the summit on the world in the backdrop of the Russia-Ukraine war? Let's open it up for discussion. Ambassador Manju Seth, former diplomat, with us. We also have Manish Chand, international affairs expert. He's joining us live from Indonesia. Lieutenant Colonel J.S. Sodhi, foreign affairs expert, with us. Professor Madhav Nalapad, editorial director of the Sunday Guardian. I'm going to start first of all with you, Professor Manju Seth. How significant, ma'am, do you think is this meeting which just took place between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Rishi Sunak, is considering it's coming one in the backdrop really of the much anticipated FTA deal, which had been stalled in the backdrop of some very unfortunate comments by the UK Home Secretary? Would you say that Rishi Sunak offering 3,000 visas for Indian students each year is a sort of an outreach far as UK is concerned towards India?
Absolutely. And also, as part of the FTA, we've been, also been discussing free movement of people and the services. So this is an important development where they had said that after the PM's meeting, there will be an announcement expected, and that has happened, of offering 3,000 visas to young professionals of India, young Indian professionals, to come and work and live in the UK, for 2 years. So it's a positive development, and it's also partly acknowledging the need for talented professionals in the UK. Already we know that in the health system and in the UK is almost entirely run by Indian origin and Indian professionals, and so I think they realize that they need young, educated, professionally qualified Indians. And it's also one of our requests or requirements that we had said we would like more young professionals to be given visas and to be allowed to work and stay in the UK. And that's one aspect. The second aspect is that since the trade deal was supposed to be done by November and has got delayed for various reasons, because there was not enough agreement on the various aspects of the free trade deal. And now, I think when the two leaders have met, if there are major issues, they would have discussed them, I'm sure, and they would have found either a solution, or they would direct their respective ministers, trade ministers, to find, and the Foreign Office, to find a meeting point, and so that the FTA is concluded at the earliest, which would be a win-win for both sides, I'm sure. And in addition, this is the first meeting between both of them, between Rishi Sunak and our Prime Minister. It's a positive development again, because as we have been saying, though he's Indian origin, but still he is British. He's a British Prime Minister representing British interests, and it's an important country for India. And this first meeting, I'm sure, will pave the way for better Indo-UK relations.
Well, absolutely. And migration and mobility was, of course, a key sticking point. While the number, the 3,000 visas, may be minuscule, but certainly it does go a long way as far as optics are concerned and outreach by the UK Prime Minister. Also, Manish Chand, if you could join us here, you're joining us from Indonesia. Far as the G20 summit is concerned, if I could broad base it, Prime Minister Narendra Modi today not just met Rishi Sunak, he also met the leaders of other European nations as well, from the German Chancellor to the French Prime Minister, even the Italian counterpart of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he held multiple bilaterals. Take us through really, what do you think it means for India? Would you say that perhaps it's time that India takes a central role, a leadership role, not just remain perhaps a spectator when it comes to bigger global events which are affecting the world, especially have cast a shadow on the G20 summit, say perhaps the Russia-Ukraine war? Manish Chand, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm saying that in Bali, the big message from the G20 summit is also a big endorsement, a big thumbs up to India's global role. The inside story is that, as many of you would know, that there was a lot of skepticism about this Bali summit, even coming out with a joint declaration. There were gloom and doom narratives about it, predicting the collapse, no family photo, no joint statement. And finally, Indian negotiators, of course, Prime Minister Modi, they pulled off the nearly impossible. So now we have the Bali Declaration. And India played an instrumental role in getting the rival parties to agree on a formulation on the Ukraine. There is just one paragraph in the joint statement, in the Bali Declaration, but that's very crucial. And significantly, this para on the joint declaration contains that famous one-liner now about Prime Minister Modi telling Russian President Vladimir Putin in Samarkand that this is not an age of war. It is actually formally included in the joint statement. So, India's viewpoint, India's has projected its G20 presidency. By the way, Prime Minister Modi took over the G20 presidency on India's behalf towards the end of the session. He looked very jubilant, and the message he has sent out is a very statesman-like message, a message of hope, harmony, peace, stability. And I think at this point, they may sound like standard diplomatic cliches, but given the fractured state of the world, given the kind of escalating tensions we are seeing and rival competitive agendas, it's not just Russia and the West, but there are seething rivalries. I think a grouping like G20, which comprises the world's top economies, it has to play its part. And this is what Prime Minister Modi, after taking over the presidency, has promised: an action-oriented, decisive, result-oriented presidency, where all important issues like food security, energy, these are bread and butter issues.
Yeah.
These are not abstract issues on which people's lives depend. So I think India has finally stepping up to the plate and playing its rightful global role.
Yes, today we did see an endorsement of India's role. Colonel J.S. Sodhi, if you could come in here, while of course the words of Prime Minister Narendra Modi were almost verbatim included in the G20 declaration when Prime Minister Narendra Modi said it's not an era for war. Do you think India is ready to play a larger role, perhaps the role of a mediator when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war? Because the G20 summit, a shadow of the war has been cast on the entire summit. It's a summit which is especially and specifically for economic issues, but it looks like that the war has completely overshadowed it. Do you see India playing a significant role, perhaps the role of a peacemaker, considering it's the only country which gets along well with not just the two key players, Russia and Ukraine, but also with Europe and the US?
Jai Hind, Meenakshi. It's my honor to be on a news channel and a privilege to be with the esteemed co-panelist. If this Russia-Ukraine war should have been stopped, the first role should have been played by the United Nations, but they were not successful. After the United Nations, there are three countries which can stop this war. They are Turkey, Israel and India. Both Turkey and Israel have played their part. They too have failed. India is one country, like you rightly brought out, it has a good rapport with Russia, with Ukraine, with Europe, with USA. And if at this point of time, any country in the world can stop this war, it is only and only India. With India assuming the presidentship of G20, I'm sure in the next 1 year, maybe sooner, this war will come to an end. Because Prime Minister Narendra Modi is a global iconic figure today. whatever he speaks, it is regarded with great respect, which is evident by the fact that the Bali Declaration has included his statement verbatim, which he told President Putin in Samarkand. Well, it requires a leader of a great international stature to have told a statement, and the fact that Prime Minister Modi told it, which no other leader has told President Putin on his face, I think it has already shown that India has arrived on the scene, and India is now ready to take up the issue of ending this war, provided both Ukraine and Russia formally request India. India will definitely end this war. Apart from Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the Indian Foreign Service is the finest foreign service in the world. The IFS can...
Right, Colonel Sodhi, and apologies, I'm interrupting you here because we'll have to address these live visuals. That's Prime Minister Narendra Modi on your screens. He's leaving from Bali and we have live visuals from Indonesia. Of course, he's waving to all his well-wishers, supporters, others who had come to see him off at the airport. That's, of course, Prime Minister Narendra Modi after a very successful G20 summit, really a summit where India's role has been endorsed, where everyone's talking really about the centrality of India's significance, leadership when it comes to the world order. After, of course, establishing that, holding very successful bilateral with multiple world leaders, the Prime Minister, of course, is leaving, and that's the diaspora there. Of course, we'd seen the sort of warm welcome Prime Minister Narendra Modi had received there in Bali, and it's, of course, an emotional goodbye there for the Prime Minister as well from the diaspora. Professor Nalapad also live with us. Professor Nalapad, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has a personality which of course always attracts large crowds, attracts diaspora. Even this time around, would you say that he's been able to establish India's leadership, India's significance at a time when the G20 is completely divided? It's fractious, of course. And also, how do you see, sir, the juxtaposition between the bilaterals with Prime Minister Narendra Modi held with Rishi Sunak and others, and when it comes to the same leader, Rishi Sunak, he refuses to meet Xi Jinping, cites scheduling issues, sir?
Well, look, I'd like to say that thanks to Prime Minister Modi's diplomacy, India has got the best of relations with both Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin. Both of them are very appreciative of the Prime Minister, and this is frankly an amazing diplomatic feat. And this has been done by very clever diplomacy. So there's no question that India has goodwill on both sides of the fence. Let's be honest. Ukraine is only the theater of conflict. The real conflict is the proxy war between NATO and Russia. That's where the conflict is. And frankly, I think Prime Minister Modi, being very realistic, understands that there is no magic wand solution to the ending of this conflict except by what he has said, which is the era of peace, which basically means please have an immediate ceasefire. Unfortunately, Zelensky is not ready to have that ceasefire, and NATO is not prepared to make him have that ceasefire by withdrawing its ample supply of weapons. So this is going to continue, and the point is, it is sending into jeopardy all the environmental goals that the world has been talking about, and more importantly, the economic growth and development that the world so desperately needs.
Absolutely. And, Ambassador Manju said, if you could come in here, S. Shankar had earlier said too early for India to mediate, too early for India to play the role of a peacemaker. What really do you see India's role is going to be, ma'am, going forward? Also the challenges in front of India as it takes over the G20 presidentship for next year, considering it's coming in the backdrop of an extremely divided world. Look at G20, there wasn't even a family photo op. Putin didn't even attend. World leaders, many of them aren't even seeing eye to eye. Okay, we've lost that line with Ambassador Manju Seth. Manish Chand, would you like to take that question, please, sir?
Yeah, so India, of course, is playing a kind of role, given its excellent equations with both Russia and Ukraine and United States. But at the same time, going ahead, because, as India takes over the presidency of G20, the issue is going to be very much alive and will cast its shadow as long as the war is raging. And only yesterday, just before, at the time the G summit was happening, Russia had launched some missile strikes at Ukraine. So this is not ending anytime soon. So we have to also get real about one thing, that when we talk about India playing the role of peacemaker, or when we talk about Ukraine peace, the real question to ask is that the United States doesn't want peace. Let's face it, the big player doesn't want peace because the larger, and NATO doesn't want peace in some ways, because their larger overarching objective is the destruction of Russia, diminishment of Russia. And also, what will be the terms of the deal? I mean, as of now, it has reached a point where it's going to require all one's diplomatic skills to get both sides to sign on to some sort of peace formula. So yes, India, if we are talking about, if any country has the requisite credentials, and here one important thing I want to point out, when we are talking about India and India G20 presidency, India is also pitching it or projecting itself as a voice of the global South. And one of the reasons we had this midway understanding in the Bali declaration in Bali was also the power of emerging economies. This is the first time that India, Indonesia is the chair. Just
okay, point taken, and I'll just take that forward. All right, point taken, so I'll just take that forward. Right, since you're speaking about the significance of India's role, it's also important that we mention China at this point of time, isn't it, Colonel Sodhi? Considering really, as I said earlier, there was, of course, this juxtaposition, something which was pointed out by many, when Rishi Sunak held a bilateral with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, made such a huge outreach to India, and on the other hand, refused to even meet Xi Jinping. Also, if you look at the statements, despite of holding a bilateral with Xi Jinping, Biden shied at China when it comes to Taiwan. Very, very strong words which came from the side of Justin Trudeau also far as China's expansionist policy is concerned. Would you say that this G20 also is somehow a testimony as to how India is becoming more popular and central to the world, and China is getting completely isolated by these world powers?
Definitely, Meenakshi, I would like to add one thing, that G20 is the most complex alliance because it has some countries who don't see eye to eye with each other. And the fact that India has assumed presidency at this critical juncture, when the Russia-Ukraine war is raging on, the global economy supply lines have got shattered badly, and the fact, like I just told you, that the G20 is a complex organization itself, India has now emerged as a pivotal player in the entire international relations, because every country the world over respects India. Even Pakistan, they may hate us, but they know in times of crisis, India will be there for them. A glaring example is in the Russia-Ukraine war has just started. India not only evacuated 22,000 of its own students, it also evacuated 147 Pakistani students. In fact, the Pakistani students in Ukraine, when they were fleeing the war zone, they had put the Indian flags on their vehicles because the Indian flag guaranteed, safe corridor there. So India is a friend to everyone. India helps everyone. We have seen China, whichever country they have helped financially, they have ruined that country. Whereas India helps anyone, it helps because our Sabhata and Sanskriti teach us that when we help someone, we do not expect anything in return. And that is the reason that today India has emerged as a global player. Every country in the world respects India. Every international leader wants to have a bilateral meeting with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So the fact that India has carved a niche for itself in the international relations, I have no doubt in the next 1 year that India assumes the presidency of G20 officially on 1st December will be a game changer. Rather, I would put it, 2023 is the unofficial International India year, because we'll be having the presidency of two important alliances, the G20 and the SU, and both the summits will be held in India next year.
All right, Professor Nalapad, would you concur, what Colonel Sodhi has to say? Because just to play the devil's advocate, there are many who are saying that the G20 presidency is not going to mean much. End of the day, there are many, of course, who have been taking jibes at the G20, saying that it's an era perhaps for G0, considering none of the member countries, at least most of them, don't get along. They're not on the same page. Russia-Ukraine war, of course, one of the biggest reasons which has caused division between the G20 countries. It doesn't really have any sort of real powers. What do you think is India's presidency going to mean for us and the challenges in front of us, sir?
Well, the important thing is that G20 is a platform that gives Prime Minister Modi, who is a global statesperson, an opportunity to articulate a policy that essentially is based on the principles of democracy and non-aggression. India has always gone the extra mile. Even when confronted with aggression, India has sought to go the extra mile to try and make peace. Although, unfortunately, at least two countries, one on India's west, the other to the north of India, have basically not gone along with this and have only intensified their problem, their pressure on India. The fact is, this is a very good platform for Prime Minister Modi in 2023 to articulate his vision for the world. Because don't forget, India is a very key component of the whole world, of the globalized world. We can't deglobalize. That's not possible. We can decouple from hostile countries. There's no question of deglobalization. And Prime Minister Modi is the, if I may say so, the tribune of a healthy globalization among friends, among countries that are friendly to each other, and also a very clear, if I may say so, a very clear leader who understands the need to ensure that in future, countries that are hostile are not in a position to dictate terms or to blackmail India as a consequence of supply chains. So all this is a very important game plan for the future, a very important, if I may say so, policy framework. And I think 2023 will be a great year for Prime Minister Modi to articulate that policy framework as India becomes the president of the G20.
Absolutely. And, sir, since you speak of trade, and last question I'd like to take to Ambassador Manju Seth. She's rejoined us. Ma'am, when we speak of the significance of G20, it's of course representing 85% of the world's GDP. Trade, very, very important. Specifically, speaking of the bilateral meetings, Prime Minister Narendra Modi met Rishi Sunak on the sidelines of the G20 summit. As we close this show, what do you think really it's going to mean for the Indo-UK FTA deal? As I said earlier at the onset of this show, that the deal had been stalled earlier, reportedly due to some unfortunate comments which were made by the Home Secretary of the UK. Reports, of course, coming in that Rishi Sunak has nudged Prime Minister Modi on the same. Do you think that, as a result of this meeting, the relations, when it comes to economic relations between the two countries, likely to improve and the FTA deal likely to be expedited, ma'am?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm sorry, the last time while you were asking me the question, I think the internet went, so I wasn't able to, I got disconnected. Coming to your question, yes, absolutely. It is going to make an impact when leaders meet. When leaders meet, they are able to iron out all differences, and whatever are the sticking points, they are able to find solutions, or they direct their ministers to find solutions. So I think this meeting is significant for India-UK bilateral relations, and I think it will go a long way in cementing the ties between India and the UK, which is an important trade partner, important technology partner for India, and the exchange of young professionals will further intensify or cement the relationship at the people-to-people level, and I think will also contribute to better outcomes for the relationship. And FTA itself will hopefully is expected to lead to the increase in bilateral trade.
Well, exactly. And ma'am, migration and mobility was one sticking point, of course. With this latest move by Rishi Sunak, numbers may be less, but certainly it's a step in the right direction. We can only expect the relations to improve further. In fact, talking overall about the G20 summit, India has been able to cement its position as a world leader, one of the few countries which shares good relations with almost all key players who are embroiled some way, directly or indirectly at least, related to the Russia-Ukraine war. Is India going to, of course, play a peacemaker between the two countries? What the G20 presidency means for India when it comes to economic growth? And is it time that India takes a central and leadership role when it comes, of course, to sticking global issues? Those are the big open-ended questions which we leave our viewers.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.